Hey guys, that's Admirable here. Today I'm going to be going over the Raging Worgen Warrior build that I've been playing for the last week or so. I have about a 65% win rate with it. I think I'm 79 and 44 is my overall record. And the deck is incredibly difficult to play. So what I want to talk about here today is some sort of mulligan tactics that I've been using and some things that I've refined that I think are really important in certain matchups and that I think you can focus on if you really want to sort of accelerate your learning curve with this deck. Again, it takes quite a few games and it's a blast to play, so I really recommend it for you guys. But the first thing to do is to make sure that you're not messing up your opening hands because that is critical to the gameplay. So the first thing we're going to talk about, of course, is the Raging Worgen combo and what it means for your deck. This is a lot of times the combo that you need to kill players. It's Raging Worgen, charge makes it 5 power, the Inner Rage activates the Raging Worgen for Wind Fury and +1 attack. That's going to make it 7 power. I'm sorry, that's going to make it 6 power. The Inner Rage gives it 2 more by itself. That makes it 8. You add a Rampage into that, it's 11 power. It's got Wind Fury, it's got charge. That's 22 damage from hand for 8 mana. This is a lot of times basically all you need, but there's some matchups where you need a little bit of extra gas, and so that's something I want to talk about in conjunction with this. Say you're playing against Control Warrior. It's very often they're going to get above the 30 life point total when you're going into these combo turns, and you need a little bit more to go with it. That's why Emperor Thaurissan and Faceless Manipulator in the deck. Emperor Thaurissan can provide you with these massive discounts so that you can combine this and get even more burst damage from your opponent. So let's take a look at this. Say we have Raging Worgen, Charge, Inner Rage, and Rampage and Faceless Manipulator. Obviously, we can't cast all this in one turn. This is 6, 7, 8. That's 13 mana. So Emperor Thaurissan will need to give you a 3 mana discount in total in order to be able to activate this one. So take away Inner Rage for just a second here. If you notice this, if you want to cast all 4 of these in the same turn, you need a 3 total mana discount, which means if you have any 3 of these pieces in your hand, in terms of 1 Faceless Manipulator, 1 Rampage, 1 Charge, or 1 Raging Worgen, 1 Charge, 1 Faceless Manipulator, or 1 Raging Worgen, 1 Rampage, and 1 Faceless Manipulator. That'll give you a 3 mana discount with that Emperor Thaurissan so that you can play all this in one turn. So say you end up going with that. It's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 damage with just this combo right here. You copy that with Faceless Manipulator. That's 44 damage from hand. There are times when you have to go above and beyond that, which is why we have second copies of Rampage in the deck. It's why we have second copies of Inner Rage in this build. But for the most part, what's going to end up happening here is that this is where you need yourself to be so that you can pick up those big combo damage pieces and really put the test to your opponent. So Emperor Thaurissan is really kind of one of the key cards here, where you want to reserve it until you can activate it at the right time. You don't need to do this in every single matchup, but there's a lot of matchups where you do, so always be on the lookout for that. And then the same thing with Faceless Manipulator. Sometimes I use that card outside of combo, but it's pretty rare circumstances where I'm usually desperate for it. The second thing I want to talk about is Wild Pyromancer combos and the importance of sequencing this absolutely perfectly. If you play Wild Pyromancer cards in the right order, you're going to have a really bad time for it. Say, for instance, you're on 4 mana, you have the coin, your opponent's got a 3 health minion and a couple 2 health or 1 health minions out, and you have Wild Pyromancer and Battle Rage and Blood to Ichor and the coin in your hand. If you're on 4 mana and you play Wild Pyromancer and then you coin and you move to Blood to Ichor and then Battle Rage, what's going to end up happening instead is that you're going to play Wild Pyromancer, you're going to coin, it's going to deal your Wild Pyromancer damage, you're going to Blood to Ichor, it's going to deal your Blood to Ichor appointed damage, along with your Wild Pyromancer. Your Wild Pyromancer is going to die, you're going to have Battle Rage in your hand, it'll probably be Battle Rage for 2, instead of for 3 had you sequenced it properly. So for instance, in that exact same situation, what you could do instead is you could coin to 5 mana, and then you could play Wild Pyromancer, and then you could play Blood to Ichor. The Blood to Ichor summons the 2/2. The Wild Pyromancer deals 1 damage to everything. So now you have a 3/1 Wild Pyromancer and a 2/1 Blood to Ichor token. Then you cast Battle Rage, you get that extra card draw. Stuff like that's really important in this build because if you mess that up, you can cost yourself an extra card draw. And I can tell you how many times I've had the 30th card in my deck be the card I need. It's not terribly uncommon, so making sure that you sequence that properly is really key to picking up some of these games. So always be thinking about your turns before you end up activating Wild Pyromancers. It's really important. The second thing I want to talk about to combo with Wild Pyromancer is Commanding Shout. Commanding Shout is actually in a really unique position with Wild Pyromancer because you can create some pretty real board swings with just this combo right here. When you cast Wild Pyromancer and then Commanding Shout, the Commanding Shout draws you a card, deals 1 damage to everything. Because Commanding Shout doesn't let your minions get reduced below 1 health, what ends up happening is you can just chain together a bunch of spells in the late game. So say you're on turn 7 and your hand looks something like this. So you have Blood to Ichor and you have a Commanding Shout. You can play Wild Pyromancer, then you can play Commanding Shout, then you can play Blood to Ichor, then you can play Battle Rage. You've just dealt 4 damage to one of their minions, 3 damage to all the rest of them, and probably drew 3 cards off that. That is an immense board swing that can take place with Wild Pyromancer, but the sequencing on it, again, is pretty paramount. You always need to be thinking about it and where it ends up fitting in. So now what I want to talk about here is the importance of cards like Shield Block, which I don't have an image for at the moment, but what it ends up meaning for you. Oftentimes with Shield Block, if you don't have anything to do on turn 3 or turn 4, I basically just cycle Shield Block. The whole purpose of that card is to give you 5 extra life and to dig into your build. This isn't like a traditional Control Warrior build where you need to be really evaluating the context between the opportunity cost on armor up and with Shield Block. You basically just want to Shield Block and dig. The faster you find your combo, the quicker you can kill your opponent. So don't be afraid to just go ahead and burn that card, not think too much of it. So now I'm going to start getting into matchup specifics and what they mean for everyone else. Before I start rolling into Druid, I want to talk about things that I never do. When I have Fiery War X in my hand, I will not mulligan this card, period. There's not a single matchup where you want to mulligan Fiery War X right now. I am honestly becoming convinced that this is the best card in Standard at the moment. It provides you too much leverage, it provides you too much value, and it's way too cheap to be considering mulligan. Do not mulligan Fiery War X in any matchup whatsoever, period. Next thing I want to talk about is things I do when I have Fiery War X. And these are pretty much rules I use for almost every single matchup, but not always. There are times I deviate from this. But when I have Fiery War X, I really don't like to mulligan Ravaging Ghoul or Blood to Ichor. And the reason for this is that this helps me deal with 4 health minions really effectively. Think about stuff like Frothing Berserker. Think about stuff like Imp Gang Boss. Think about stuff like Totem Golem. Those cards have 4 health, and you need to be able to answer them. The Fiery War X does a great job at setting that up, but this is sort of like the assist for Blood to Ichor and for Ravaging Ghoul is when you have these with Fiery War X, it's really easy to kill those. So in Druid, it's a little bit less important to have Blood to Ichor and Ravaging Ghoul because Druid doesn't typically have many 4 health minions, but there's still cards you really want to consider keeping, I think, when you have Fiery War X in those matchups. Slam is also a card that I typically do not mulligan in any single matchup. In fact, I think I have found myself keeping this in my last 50 or so games every single time it's in my opening hand. I will usually not keep 2 copies of it. I will almost always keep 1 copy of it, though. So this is like a really important opening hand that you can have versus most of the decks that are out there. The second thing I want to talk about is Wild Pyromancer with the coin. Now, when I have the coin, I have determined that when I mulligan Wild Pyromancer, that it's a mistake. So something I want to get away from doing is mulliganing away all of my copies of Wild Pyromancer when I have the coin. You typically don't need more than 1 copy of it, so if you had 2, you can go ahead and pitch 1 away. But when you have the coin, Wild Pyromancer is a huge enabler for cards like Battle Rage and Commanding Shout, and so this is sort of a bud and breader turn of your deck, is when you can make these sorts of combos, draw lots of cards, and actually sweep out a lot of their board pressure. It's a really important thing to think about, that when you have the coin, don't mulligan Wild Pyromancer. When you're going first, you have Wild Pyromancer, think about the context of the matchup. The last thing I want to talk about is Acolyte of Pain, which I actually did not bring up an image for either. But Acolyte of Pain is in a position where a lot of people keep this card because it's a source of card draw. And when you're playing Control Warrior, that could be very right. Control Warrior doesn't really have a lot of card draw. Our deck's filled with it. So the matchups you want to be keeping Acolyte of Pain with when you're playing Warrior are in a couple situations. Number 1, when you can play Loot Hoarder in front of it and use the Acolyte of Pain to kind of rebuild the board tension after you played your Loot Hoarder. The other thing you want to keep Acolyte of Pain in is in the slow matchups where they're not going to pressure you very hard. The third spot you want to keep Acolyte of Pain is usually when you have Fiery War X, and you can play turn 2 Fiery War X and then play turn 3 Acolyte of Pain. The Acolyte of Pain can be a really big source of board tension against your opponent when you have Fiery War X, because the Fiery War X answers their early threats. And then with the Acolyte of Pain, say they play like a 3/4 or something in the face of your Acolyte of Pain, a lot of times you can do things like cast Blood to Ichor on your Acolyte of Pain and draw a card, and then you can do, quite literally, because we put in the second copy, you're able to burn the first one of these. You can play Rampage on your Acolyte of Pain, have a 4/5, run over their guy, draw another card, and have a sizable threat that will continue drawing cards on the board. Those are pretty much the only situations I like keeping Acolyte of Pain in. But for Druid in particular, this is kind of a weird matchup because one of the ways that I almost always seem to win is with Wild Pyromancer and Battle Rage and drawing a lot of cards. So against Druid in particular, I'm actually keeping Wild Pyromancer when I'm going first against them. And the main reason for it is so that I can get big value out of Battle Rage. Again, the way you're going to win is by digging into your deck. Now, the problem with Druid and your combo is that they oftentimes can put big taunts in the way with stuff like Ancient of War, Druid of the Claw, stuff like that. And so your executes have to be picked really well in this matchup. Generally speaking, I would tend to use more resources to deal with a non-taunt threat that's very powerful. Think like Fandral, for instance, or Emperor Thorson. And I would tend to save my executes for things like Ancient of War because you have to sink too many resources into those to get it done. But that's generally been my game plan versus Druid. Warrior is in a really tricky spot because there's so many different Warrior variants. But again, the game plan kind of applies the same. I think Wild Pyromancer and Battle Rage is really one of your bread and butter combos in this deck, but I typically tend to not keep this unless I have the coin in my hand. When you have the coin, not only do you get the extra card slot to dig, but you also have an extra activator for your Wild Pyromancers, so you don't have to just waste stuff. A lot of times in this matchup, they don't actually pressure you, and so your Blood to Ichor is a lot harder to use. Because of that, Acolyte of Pain goes up massively in this matchup. This is a matchup where you do want to be keeping Acolyte of Pain. But if you're playing against Dragon Warrior, which is something you really have to consider, this is where Fiery War Axe and Slam become a little bit more important. Now, when I have Slam in this matchup, I will also tend to keep Ravaging Ghoul, because turn 2 casting Slam on an Alexstrasza's champion and then playing Ravaging Ghoul on turn 3 is a real consideration that you need to have. The second thing that's going into here is that you need to be able to answer Frothing Berserker really well. And so sometimes when they just play Frothing Berserker, you can just go ahead and slam it. You'll take a little bit of damage, but what you can often do is on the following turn, follow up with something like Wild Pyromancer and then Blood to Ichor to finish off the Frothing Berserker and then leave yourself with a 3-1 and a 2-1. So sometimes they get to Ravaging Ghoul you there, but that's why the combos we're looking for always couple with Fiery War Axe. Fiery War Axe is sort of the bread and butter that cleans everything up. And then in addition to that, if you can manage to stick an Acolyte of Pain on board moving into your Wild Pyromancer turn, that's where you can pick up a lot of cards and really start to build your hand to look for those big Raging Worgen combos against them. When you're playing against Cthulhu Warrior, it's really important, by the way, to not be wasting your combo. This matchup, they can often get to 60 plus life, and so something that's really important is quite literally being able to play Raging Worgen, charge, 2 Inner Rages, 1 or 2 Rampages, and Faceless Manipulator in the same turn. So in this matchup, unless you are going to die if you don't play Emperor Thaurissan, you need to basically wait until you have a lot of pieces to play Emperor Thaurissan and get the big discounts. And that's where I'll kind of touch on what Emperor Thaurissan means for me when I'm falling behind. If you're going to lose the game because you don't play Emperor Thaurissan, you probably just need to play it and sacrifice the fact that you cannot have the full 60 damage plus combo available to you. What this is going to do is it's going to help you pull you back into the game. Maybe you can get some chip damage in with Ravaging Ghoul, maybe you get some chip damage in with Loot Hoarders or Acolyte of Pain, maybe using 1 copy of Rampage to do it, even just kind of throwing Fiery War Axes at their face. The general rule of thumb is that you want to save Emperor Thaurissan until he needs to be played, which ideally is when you have combo pieces in your hand, but sometimes it's when you're just falling behind on board, so that's a little bit of thrown in there for it. Hunter is the matchup where I have struggled with the most, and I think because that's the case, you need to be taking bigger risks in this matchup. For instance, I think you need to hard mulligan for Fiery War Axe. I think you need to hard mulligan for Slam. When you're going second, you need to really have Wild Pyromancer in your hand. When you're going first, Loot Hoarder is incredibly important in this matchup to be able to contest the board, draw cards, and continue to answer afterwards. But things I'm not doing in this matchup, for instance, is I'm not keeping Ravaging Ghoul. I'm not keeping Blood to Ichor. I'm not looking for Wild Pyromancer Battle Rage combos here. I'm looking to just clear their opening board, try to restrict their options as much as possible so that they cannot leverage the damage against me. Oftentimes in this matchup, when they get to Call of the Wild, you can handle the first Call of the Wild. What you can't typically do is handle the first Call of the Wild and then also fend off the pressure they're adding with it because your life total is so low. So it's really important early on to be very mindful of that and using your resources to try to restrict those options. You're going to find yourself in situations where you feel like you need to top deck, but keep in mind that you have a lot of cycle going on in this deck and your cycle is very powerful. So if you can put them on the back foot, sometimes you can keep them there. But for the most part, this is one of your bad matchups, and I think because of that, you need to be taking more risks. Mage. Mage is a matchup where I will always be mulliganing as though it's Tempo Mage. So what that means is we're keeping Fiery War Axe, we're keeping Slam, we're keeping Wild Pyromancer in our hand. One of the big turns that Tempo Mage can have against you is quite literally just Sorcerer's Apprentice and Mirror Image. That shuts off your Fiery War Axe pretty well. So one of the ways you have to answer that is by playing Wild Pyromancer and then using like Commanding Shout and Battle Rage. If you play Wild Pyromancer, Commanding Shout, Battle Rage, you're going to wipe all that stuff out and you're going to draw cards in the process. It's really important. Loot Hoarder is a card that is really interesting in this matchup because if you're going second, it means that they have a chance to play Mana Worm before you play your Loot Hoarder. If you're going first, it means that they can still play the Mana Worm, but what's going to happen is when you respond with Loot Hoarder there, their next turn has to be a decision of, do I build up my Mana Worm by casting spells, or do I use my Hero Power on the Loot Hoarder? If they use Hero Power on Loot Hoarder, the Mana Worm becomes a much less significant threat because it's probably staying at 1 power for that turn. If they choose to trade over it, that sets up Ravaging Ghoul and Wild Pyromancer to sweep up the Mana Worm. But when you're going second and they play turn 1 Mana Worm, this Loot Hoarder is strained in your hand. You do not want to coin Loot Hoarder because you need that coin for Wild Pyromancer combos or just for general tempo against the deck. So Loot Hoarder is a card I don't keep going second in a lot of matchups because of those tempo ideas. So that's something you always want to be thinking about as well, but it's a card I often keep when I'm going first. When they're playing Freeze Mage, this is the one trick I've learned for this matchup. is that your goal to kill them is not to pop their ice block. It's to quite literally wait until they will draw at least 1 fatigue damage and then set them to 1 health. That's going to require a lot of counting because of their life total. There's too many variables for me to list them out in this video, but your goal in that matchup is quite literally, in the Freeze Mage matchup, is to wait until they have a fatigue draw coming up and then set them to 1 health so that the fatigue draw kills them. That is how you win the Freeze Mage matchup. It's almost impossible to push through ice blocks. You do not have the power to do it. Paladin is a matchup that I think is pretty easy because it's very polarized. Either they're very slow and you have plenty of time, or they're very quick and you have plenty of tools to fight against that. So Ravaging Ghoul looks great in this matchup. Slam's looking great early on. Blood to Ichor's looking great early on. Wild Pyromancer's looking good to early on. You have so many cards to offset the Paladin's early game when they have it that you don't have to worry about the slower decks because you have so much draw on your deck, and it's so easy to activate Battle Rage here because of their lack of pressure that you can always find spots to draw big, massive cards. So always mulligan as though this is a quick matchup, and then if they're a slow matchup, look for that big Battle Rage value with Wild Pyromancer. Dig to your combos, execute that Tyrion, and push through the damage. The other thing that's in that matchup is you really need to consider when you should or should not Faceless Manipulator Tyrion, period. There's a lot of times when I Faceless Manipulator Tyrion and won the game because of it. There's sometimes I Faceless Manipulator Tyrion and lose the game because of it. So that's something you need to weigh. It's very contextual, but it's something that you should consider at least, not just throw out the window or not think about, but you need to be careful with it. It can cost you some games. Priest, this is about as free as the matchup can possibly get. They don't pressure you very well. They don't have big combo damage. They don't get above 30 life. In this matchup, I'm strictly looking for Battle Rage value. I'm always going to keep Fiery War Axe in this matchup, but I will quite literally keep Battle Rage even if I don't have a Wild Pyromancer. And the reason for that is I'm just looking for Wild Pyromancers that I can get off a big Battle Rage. Pretty easy matchup, honestly. I'm not going to go too much into detail on this one. This is about as free as it gets. Rogue is an interesting matchup because they have the potential to pressure you, but they don't have the potential to fend off combo damage. So what you're looking for in this matchup is to offset their early tempo and then scale into your late game stuff. And what that means is you probably are not keeping Wild Pyromancer in this matchup, even when you're going second. It's kind of the one exception, I think, to the keeping Wild Pyromancer rule, because it's really important to find Fiery War Axe and try to punish their 3 health stuff. The second thing that's really important is to be able to actually take out Tomb Pillager and take out Violet Teacher, which is going to require you to have Slam, Ravaging Ghoul, or Blood to Ichor. So when I have Fiery War Axe, these are also cards I'm looking for. Again, I'm not mulliganing Slam in this matchup, but I'm going to consider keeping Ravaging Ghoul and Blood to Ichor in this matchup as well, because it's so powerful with Fiery War Axe. What that generally means is if I'm going second, I'll be apt to keep one of these cards, one copy of maybe one of them. And when I'm going first, I'm pretty much hard mulliganing for Fiery War Axe with the exception of Slam in this matchup. Loot Hoarder's not any good in this matchup because your opponent's tendency is to use Dagger up on turn 2 anyway, so they just get to kill your Loot Hoarder for free. Not really much to think about it. Put together combo damage against this deck and punish them. Shaman is kind of in a very similar spot with the Rogue, except that it can get a little bit difficult. So Fiery War Axe, again, obviously very good in this matchup. If you have Fiery War Axe, Blood to Ichor, and Ravaging Ghoul also become very good. Slam is a card that, this is again sort of the exception to the rules. I don't really want to keep Slam against Shaman unless I also have Fiery War Axe. The reason for this is if your opponent plays turn 1 Tunnel Trog, you're going to want to answer it with Fiery War Axe. What that means is if you kept Slam in your opening hand, that's one less opportunity you had to draw Fiery War Axe on the right time. And the second thing about it is you're going to have to slam that Tunnel Trog if that's the case. The last thing you want to do is coin Slam against them or slam it. It's awful. You don't want to be in that position. You want to top deck your slams to be able to slam things and then chain it into other spells. It's really important to be doing that. Loot Hoarder is kind of in the same boat against this build, where you don't want to be playing it because it's kind of like a slam that your opponent gets more control over. They can opt to attack this with Tunnel Trog. They can opt to maybe Flame Juggler this guy away. It's just not very good in this matchup. It's okay to draw, but I'm mulliganing it away in search for my really high priority cards in that matchup. Wild Pyromancer is the card that's really interesting because when you're going second, it's really important to chain together something that can kill the Feral Spirit after they cast it. So what this means usually is holding on to coin until that exact turn arises. If you leave a 1 health Feral Spirit around and you're able to kill one of them in the rest of their board, that's totally fine. But something else that's really tricky in this matchup is against some of your opponents, they're going to hold on to Feral Spirits and try to cast them when you're moving into combo turns. And so because of that, you typically want to either save a Wild Pyromancer or have an incredibly powerful hand when you use your second one, so that way when they play Feral Spirits and when they play Thing from Below, you can actually just push through them and not think too much of it. And then Warlock is going to be the last matchup, which is kind of in the same vein as Shaman is, where again, Fiery War Axe is incredibly powerful, but Blood to Ichor is a card that I'm literally always keeping in this matchup. It's great versus Flame Imp, it's great versus Voidwalker, it's great versus Argent Squire. It's even not that bad versus Abusive Sergeant, but it's pretty bad for Possessed Villager. But against Possessed Villager, look at all the stuff we have. We have Ravaging Ghoul, we got Wild Pyromancer. Again, we're not really too worried about this matchup. You're trying to sweep their board early and then leverage that into winning afterwards, which is where cards like Rampage actually come into big value, is because typically you can keep one damage minion around and push the rest of it afterwards. So it's not too big a deal to be able to push through it, but basically you're looking for big board sweeps. If they have to be playing Reno, if they happen to be playing Reno, this is where Battle Rage kind of becomes your bread and butter card. I don't think Reno is necessarily the best matchup for you, but what I do think is that if you can get some immense Battle Rage value, that you probably have an advantage here. You can really move into big combo damage turns before they do, and their pressure can oftentimes be stifled just by your happenstance resources with Fiery War X, Slam, and Execute. It's a matchup where you don't have to be afraid to use Execute if the time calls for it. So that's kind of been my experience with this deck. These are tips that I think can help you in your gameplay to make sure that you're pulling together some wins that you maybe don't do afterwards. Something else I want to stress is the importance of the fact that this deck is not easy to play. When I first started playing it, I was like, it's about a 7.5 out of 10. Then I started playing it some more, I was like, it's about an 8. It's about an 8.5. Then I tweeted I thought it was a 9 out of 10. After about 140 games of this deck, I think it's about a 10 out of 10 difficulty to play. Now, it's really enjoyable, and it teaches you a lot of stuff about combo decks in general, but I've been playing cards for 20 years at this point, and I've played a lot of combo decks. To me, this feels like the hardest one to play. And so something I want you to keep in mind when you're playing is that you want to have your mindset let your instinct take over at times. Like when you get into familiar situations and you feel comfortable with it, let your instinct guide you. You have a limited amount of time as well, and when the rope starts to burn, you can really make some mistakes when you're combining it with card draw. So try to get comfortable with certain situations and let your instinct guide you. Be very diligent in reviewing your games, and you'll find a lot of things that you can learn about this deck and just kind of fundamentals of combo decks in general that will really teach you a lot about the game. Please let me know what you thought about this video in the comments. I'd really like to know your feedback on it. This is a little bit different than the last Mulligan video I made. But I hope you guys really enjoy it. So if you guys want to give me some feedback on that, I'd really appreciate it. You can also throw me a tweet over at That's Admirable on Twitter. And then I also stream starting at 12 p.m. Pacific, Monday through Friday, unless I'm traveling for an event, on twitch.tv/that'sadmirable. If you guys want to throw me a follow here, I'm trying to push YouTube content weekly, but I want to push meaningful YouTube content video. I just want a bunch of highlights. I want stuff that you guys can actually learn from, which is the purpose of these videos. So a lot of effort goes into making these because I have to grind hundreds of games to learn the matchups and to learn the mulligans right. But I hope you guys are patient enough to understand that that's the content I want to produce, and I hope it's helpful enough for you. So thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.